I'm Ray Poynter from The Future Place, and I'm going to be taking you through what's hot in market research. Here's the agenda. I'm going to start with some things that I've called them still hot. We can sometimes overlook things that are already happening but are still hot in the sense that they're moving quickly, they're developing, they're real areas of interest. Then I'm going to pick 3 items which I think deserve the title hot more than anything else. Then I'm going to look at a category that I call bubbling. These are things which I think are going to be really important. Maybe not next year, maybe not even the year after, but relatively soon. Then I'm going to look at some not so hot, and these are ones which I think have underperformed from their forecast. They're still interesting. People are still making good money out of them. They're good, interesting niches. That's going to cover 12 items. I could have had 20, I could have had 30 items in this broadcast. So I've got a short section which I've called What About, which tackles some of those items that are not going to come up in those 4 headings and show how they fit to a framework. And then I'm going to pick up a topic from 4 years ago which seems to be discussed quite a bit at the moment, which is no surveys in 20 years. So let's get to the first of those headings, still hot. I'm going to start with mobiles in traditional research. Mobiles are a major theme of today's presentation, but the one that I think that I want to draw attention to first is their role in traditional research. So CATI is still very important. In some countries it is still the most important method of collecting research. In social research in large parts of the world, for example North America and Australia, it is the main method of collecting social research. There's been all the buzz going on in the New York Times recently with the move to start using an online poll as part of their polling process and the excited discourse that that's concerned. So we need to remember CATI, and CATI has changed in the developed economies immensely. In many of the developed countries, 30–40% of households do not have a landline. They only have a mobile phone. We're seeing the best CATI research moving to a situation where it's increasingly using mobile phones to collect data. In the US, probably the most respected polling organization would be the Pew Center, certainly one of the most respected. And last year they said, or earlier this year, that they are now collecting 60% of their telephone interviews via CATI. Now that's got some interesting implications because you can't use the auto dialers to dial up CATI. There are some differences in how the geographic information is made available. So it's creating some challenges, but it's absolutely immense. And of course in the developed markets, the majority of telephone interviews, very few people have a landline. It's all mobile. So the first strand of this is CATI. The second strand are online surveys. I talk to people sometimes and they say, oh, well, I'm not doing mobile research. And I ask if they're doing online. And they say, yes, of course we are. About 25%, it varies depending on the circumstances, but somewhere between 20 and 30% of all online surveys are being started by people using mobile devices, using mobile phones, using tablets, using phablets. It is already an immense part of market research globally, and we need to recognize that. There is no discussion to be had about should we filter out these people. It is too large a proportion, and our job as researchers is not to be rejecting people and not to be telling them how they should or should not be doing surveys. And the other really interesting one is MCAPI. Great presentation doing the rounds last year and the early part of this year from Confirm It and Heineken, looking at how they did a beer audit in Africa. They were using interviewers going along using mobile phones to do an audit and collecting information. So it was face-to-face, but it was with mobile phones. So CAPI is computer-aided personally or computer-assisted personal interviewing. MCAPI, really big in large parts of the developed world. But it's not just the developed world. Great presentation last year from Marketing Sciences and Tesco, talking about how they've used tablets to do store exit interviews in 950 stores around the UK. So we're seeing mobile coming into all sorts of traditional market research world, and that is one of the areas that I would call still hot. It's a major force for change, and it's happening really right around the world. The second one that I put in this category of still hot is communities. You can barely go to a conference now without seeing one or more clients getting up and talking about their MROC or about their insight community, about their community panel, about how they're using communities to get closer, how they're using them to co-create, bringing customers inside the organization. This is hot, it's a major area, it's going to continue to grow, but it's almost become ordinary. And I think that is one of the things we need to be aware of with a lot of hot stuff, is that we shouldn't take our eye off it just because it becomes a bit ordinary, if it's still got a long way to go. And the final one in this category of still hot is DIY. Surveymonkey burst on the scene many years ago now. But it's not just the standalone platforms that we would call DIY. Many of the conventional platforms, the strong platforms, have a DIY element. A growing number of clients want to use DIY. DIY is one of the metaphors for modern society. So we have Airbnb, people booking their own homes, making their homes available, becoming hoteliers themselves. We see with Expedia that people are booking their own holidays. Google Analytics, people are doing their own web analytics. They want to be able to control it themselves. Small companies using Google Analytics to be able to do stuff. Uber for taxis. The ATM, remember we used to queue up for cashiers in banks to get money? And the final picture there about the dustbins. It used to be, for those of you who are my generation, that dustbin men, the refuse collectors, would come down your drive to the back of your house and they would pick up your dustbin, and you'd have one dustbin where you throw everything you want to throw away into it, and they would take it up, tip it in the lorry, bring it back to the back of your house. Now we separate our refuse and we take it out. This is all part of disintermediation, and disintermediation has got a long way to go in market research yet. Yes, there's going to be growth of the DIY tools, but there is going to be growth of DIY elements within every part of the research and insights business still. So I've got this little grid here, and on the vertical axis we've got efficacy. Does it work? Does it answer problems well? Is it robust? Is it reliable? Is it well-founded in terms of theory and practice? And on the right-hand side, and on the bottom, we've got scalable. Is it capable of being used on a really large scale because the tools are available, because the countries are available, and because of the nature of the technique? So let's just have a look. DIY research. Yeah, it's pretty scalable. Efficacy, it only works for a limited range of things. I think the thing that we've all been concerned about with DIY is not when people use it for very straightforward tasks, but when they try to use it for more complex tasks. DIY ethnography, like DIY neuroscience, is probably not a good idea. DIY simple surveys, yes. And the scalability of that is going to go up and up over the next few years. Communities, yes, they work really well. They're not as scalable as DIY. There's a bigger investment. There are fewer countries which can support it at the moment, although that is growing. So we're going to see improvements both in the scale and the efficacy of that. Mobiles in traditional MR, yeah, it is already beyond communities in scale. It's certainly beyond DIY in terms of efficacy, but it's going to grow and grow and grow. It's really the strong prediction for what's going to happen over the next few years. Now remember, if you've got a different point of view, you tweet it. You don't have to agree with what I'm saying, and I'll pick up on some of those in the Q&A session. Okay, so what's hot? For me, the absolute hottest thing in market research is in-the-moment research. If you've just bought a car, you probably remember where you bought it from, you probably remember what you paid for it, you probably remember what brand it is. On the other hand, if you've just come out of the supermarket, you probably can't remember whether you bought toothpaste. If you are just finished a meal in a restaurant, you perhaps can't remember whether you were offered a refill with your drink. In terms of your journey, there are going to be all sorts of things you cannot remember about the journey that you took 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago, or yesterday, or even 6 hours ago. We are going to get much better data about these low intensity, lower salience things by conducting research in the moment when you're doing them, or immediately after you've done them. Sometimes that is going to be by passive information, sometimes it's going to be about questions, sometimes it's going to be about surveys. There's going to be a variety of information, usually a combination of that information. It's going to open up so many more things. It's going to make a lot of research a lot more accurate. We're going to have to find out ways of achieving cooperation. We certainly can't go interrupting random people every few hours and expect them to be nice and happy about the process. But in the moment research is going to really change research for lots and lots of medium-sized brands, medium-sized companies, for a lot of those essential day-to-day activities. Another one that's going to make an enormous difference are beacons. And when we talk about beacons at the moment, it's probably easier to talk about iBeacons, the ones from Apple. Now, a beacon is a device. You put it in a location. So let's say Starbucks. You put a beacon in Starbucks. When somebody walks in with a suitable mobile phone, that phone knows they've gone into a location with a beacon. The message is sent from the phone back to the service, so the Starbucks will know, the people running the service will know, the researchers will know, the marketers will know this person has gone into Starbucks. So what can happen is a marketing message can be sent, and at the top right we have Shopkick, who are probably the most high-profile use of this sort of technology, can send you a coupon, can send you a marketing message. Or they can send you a research activity like a question, a survey, or something like this. Originally, beacons tended to be sonic beacons. They used a very high frequency sound. People couldn't hear it, but the phones could hear it, and they would then take this action. Why did people have the app downloaded with those sonic beacons to say part for Shopkick? Because they got points and they accumulated points. And this is an important part of the process. We need to work out, the industry needs to work out, the wider marketing industry needs to work out how to incentivize people so they will respond. With the iPhones, it is more linked automatically with the iBeacons, and you can link the Android phones with it as well. The picture at the bottom is all about Regent Street. There is a plan to put iBeacons everywhere in Regent Street. So we suddenly get location-based research really working. Think about how that works within the moment. You're just leaving the mall. You're at a particular shelf. The distance for these beacons can be set to be really short, like a couple of meters or 10 meters. So we will know which store you're in or which part of the store you're in. We can collect information with cooperation, with consent. Massively important that we get informed consent sorted out, and we can send a range of activities. But researchers are probably going to be, in many cases, in the same queue as marketers for sending that information. So we're going to have some interesting challenges along the way with that as well. But beacons definitely going to be, and I don't normally use the term game changer. I think beacons are a game changer in the whole area of location. GPS has proved to be a little bit problematic. This is something that works. It's got a big promoter in the case of Apple. It's got some good commercial lines too. I think it's going to be a really big thing. And then microsurveys. This is the one, I did a sneak peek of this broadcast on my blog and on LinkedIn. And the one that caused the most interest actually was this one about microsurveys, with lots and lots of people saying, you're talking about Google consumer surveys, what about civic science? And to be fair, civic science, I don't think they invented it. They were certainly the first relatively high-profile user of it. We had them on our NewMR broadcast a few years back. But I think that we do have to recognize that Google consumer surveys are the one that have put the big clout behind microsurveys. Microsurveys are 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions, maybe now 10 questions. We're seeing different providers coming in, Surveymonkey, Rewe coming in as well. It's taking a little bit of time for people to get used to thinking in terms of short questions. Really short, really quick. There are some real problems in terms of targeting. If you want just cappuccino drinkers or something like that, it's harder to get them with this sort of intercept system. But we're also seeing the concept of microsurveys coming into things like communities. If you're talking to people all the time, then you only have to ask 2 or 3 questions about your new query. The award-winning presentation at the Asia Pacific Conference of SMR this year was John Paulston with his bonsai surveys. Short surveys, very short surveys, are definitely coming through. They're going to be a bigger phenomenon going forward. So let's look at our little chart. Microsurveys. They're not as efficient at the moment because they're not linked to enough other things. They're not linked to enough targeting. That's improving. They are certainly growing in their scalability. The number of countries that can be reached. They are essentially internet-based, but I think we will probably see that switch over to be mobile-based as well as internet-based. And by mobile-based here, I don't mean mobile internet. I mean a wider range of things. For example, apps. Beacons, okay, not very scalable, limited efficacy. The people who are getting in at the moment are doing the hard learning for us, and that's great, and it's a good time for people to be experimenting with beacons. There is some really good work being done, but I expect that to grow certainly in scale, and it's going to grow a little bit in efficacy. We need larger panels, we need better software tools, more ways of analyzing that data, but they're all going to come. And then in the moment research, there is already some of it. It's been a mainstay of some of the qualitative research, and also the sorts of things we say, could you take a picture of this? I'm thinking of a lot of the stuff that Mesh do with their real-time evaluation and their in-the-moment stuff. So there's quite a bit of this already around. It's quite efficient, but it's going to get really big over the next few years. If you've got a question that doesn't have to be in the moment, and there are plenty, that's fine, but so many things will be better when they're done in the moment. Okay, bubbling. These are things that are not making a major difference at the moment, and there's one contentious item in here, but they're going to. So here's the contentious one, text analytics. Yes, some people are making great use of text analytics, and some text analytics is very clever, but I think it is only a shadow at the moment of what it's going to be in market research. In sentiment analysis, it usually doesn't work that well unless you have trained it. So automated out the box, just give me the sentiments of those statements, particularly if they're from Twitter. Statements out of Twitter are much harder to give a clear reading to, even if you use human coders. It's just the nature of the way Twitter is used and the content of links and so on. So sentiment analysis has been interesting. I'm going to show you an example later on which combines sentiment and text analysis in some other ways. Inbound comms, text analytics has been great. Where it works really well is when you're processing essentially the same information over and over again. So letters of complaint, being able to know which ones you should escalate quickly, which sort of response, which department are they writing about, those sort of things you can train the software to do. It can deal with large parts of it. Requests for RFQs as opposed to requests for a complaint form. Reaction marketing, we're seeing a growing amount of this, including in social media, where somebody will tweet something, the text analytics will flag this up as a marketing opportunity and will either automate a response or initiate a person. Service delivery. The stuff where you type in a query or you speak a query and it responds to you, that is text analytics alongside voice recognition, and it's being used to deliver services. So 3 really big areas of text analytics, but none of them are market research per se. Market research can benefit from what those 3 uses are doing, and eventually it will be able to contribute, but they are separate. Analysis of open-ended data. We've got a long way to go on this, but this is really quite exciting. Where it works best is on things like tracking studies, where you can train the software because you're doing the same thing. Where it works least well are one-off studies. You've only done 200 interviews. The questionnaire is unique. You're never going to ask exactly those questions again. And what I found is that text analysis there is more useful for spotting variations of don't know and no comment than it is actually for breaking apart the rest. That is still useful. That still reduces the time and the effort. And finally, it's going to be one of the most essential parts of bots and research bots, which comes back to service delivery, where it's a machine that's conducting the service, it's the machine that's conducting the interview, it's the machine that's conducting the research. And we're going to come back to bots as a separate topic. The fastest growing mobile and web phenomenon in the world at the moment is web messaging by a long way. Snapchat, WhatsApp, WeChat and Line are just taking over the world in a way that is fundamentally different. Only a few people seem to have started using these for research other than some basic communications, but I think there's a long way to go. Certainly Navin Williams, one of my co-authors in our new book, has been looking at web messaging and WeChat, and he'll have some more to say on that topic. Here's a really interesting chart which shows about the speed that WhatsApp took off. So you can see the growth over 4 years for Twitter, the growth over 4 years for Facebook, and the growth over 4 years for WhatsApp. So it's not so surprising that Facebook bought it for 19 billion and is risking upsetting quite a lot of people from the way that it's using WhatsApp with its messaging facility, and it's pushing the boundaries of consent. So expect to see a lot of new stuff in and around web messaging. And then research bots. So in the research world, the person who's made the biggest noise in this area is clearly Brainjuicer with their DigiVideos. The top right was an experiment John Griffiths was running a couple of years back now with research bots. Top left, we've got a picture there where Twitter admitting that 8.5% of its users are bots. These are really quite common phenomena. And on the right, market research chatbots. So you can conduct interviews. So much of market research is limited because of the need to have people at our end of the process. So communities tend to stop at 50,000 or 100,000 members because the moderation costs get really quite high. If the moderators were bots, then communities could be much larger. We could have far more interviews with people if we could conduct those interviews with bots, and if we could do some of the processing of the outcomes with bots. So we're moving more towards AI, and we're moving more towards systematic analysis. So we might see things like grounded theory, which is a relatively formulaic processing of qualitative information, come to the fore as we move down those routes. So bots are one of those things. I think we're probably 5 years out before they're really making much of a difference, but I would certainly say these are bubbling under the ground. Keep an eye on them. So, efficacy and scalable. Research bots, they're not particularly efficacious, they're not particularly scalable at the moment, they will increase. Web messaging, really not very efficacious at the moment, a little bit more scalable, and that scale is going to grow. Somebody will find a good use for them, and that use will take off across the industry. And then somebody else will find another good use for web messaging, and that will take off around the industry. And that's how that one will grow, I feel. Text analytics, it is already better than these other new techniques. it's going to keep getting better and better. My hunch is it's going to take slightly longer before we recognize what the best technique is. There are so many good people working in text analytics that I'm sure the solution will come. The recognition of what is the best solution may actually take a little bit longer. Okay, so perhaps a few people's noses out of joint in a moment. What has underperformed in my eyes? Well, facial coding I don't think has underperformed, but I think it's inherently limited. Face-to-face with an expert coder, pretty much everybody is happy with that as a method, except you need the expert coders. The coders take time, they're people, so it's about as scalable as ethnography. It's about as scalable as semiotics. And that is the problem with that. So we have something which is very powerful, which is very insightful, which goes beyond questions. We all know we need to go beyond questions, but it has this scalability problem. The next element is webcams with expert coders. And some people are doing quite well with this, but you can only do it with people who've got webcams. You really need better lighting. And there are all sorts of concerns we're going to come to on the next slide in terms of how people choose to appear on their webcam, the things that they do, the angles and so on. So it's better than fully automated, but it has some challenges. And then we have fully automated face-to-face coding. And I have met some people who believe that their in-store system, which uses video cameras to look at people's faces, and other people who use webcams and analyze those digitally, believe their systems work. They have not convinced most of the client-side people I speak to, and I think that will be the case for a long time to come. Without the fully automated, it's hard for the technique to move beyond niche. Even if it's brilliant, it's hard for it to move beyond niche. The second issue is when exactly would we use facial coding? So testing media, yes, great. Testing packs, fantastic. For quite a wide range of non-MR users, so knowing whether somebody is going to steal something, knowing whether people have understood the safety messages, you can really see a great role for webcams. So imagine you're at a public event, you're sending out announcements asking people to leave through gate A because there is a problem at gate B. Using automated facial recognition to know whether the message has got across would be really useful. To know whether people were anxious, frightened or angry would be really useful. One could imagine in sales situations automated stuff being really useful. So those are three uses, and we can also see it enhancing qual. So knowing more about whether those face-to-face interviews are true, and so we can see how it could be used in some areas of questions. But in those cases it wouldn't be standalone, it would be an enhancement. An enhancement that costs money, therefore it has to deliver extra value, because every time we look at a new technique, if it costs more money, it has to deliver more value, not just be better, not just be more informative, but actually deliver more value to be able to pay for the extra cost. So I think facial coding will continue to grow quite nicely, but I think its future is much more like that of semiotics and ethnography than of some of the other things we've been looking at. Webcam qual has actually been possible for a long, long time, and some people do it and they like it and it works fine for them. It kind of sits in a trough between people who do text-based online qual and are happy with it, and the people who insist on face-to-face, because it kind of wants some of the stuff that the face-to-face have, but the face-to-face people are typically insistent on having the whole bag of face-to-face, and the people who've bought into the text base are usually a little bit reluctant to pay any extra to go for something else. Now, webcams doesn't mean it necessarily has to be more expensive. The technology is pretty straightforward, it's pretty cheap. But a lot of people are reluctant. Just think about how many people use Skype. Do you always have the video turned on? Do you sometimes have the video turned on? Do you never have the video turned on? Who do you do FaceTime with if you're a user of one of those devices? And this is a quote from 6 years ago from Nokia, who had spotted that video phone calls really weren't taking off. And that's because we don't look good on a webcam. We don't look good if we're looking at our mobile phone. And I think one of the strengths of the iPad and the Google tablets, sorry, the Android tablets, is that they are tackling some of those problems of how we look when we're trying to do those. So this may change, but I don't see it changing in the near future. I think, again, it's the webcam qualitative is going to be a niche for people who think it meets their particular requirements. And then we get the other one that's attracted attention, social media research. Social is widely used, but it's used much, much less than most people, me included, thought it was going to be used 10 years ago. When I talk to clients in insights departments, most of them have scaled back their investment in social media. They've gone from using large contracts with big platforms to relatively straightforward monitoring processes. Not everybody, but certainly the overwhelming, maybe 70% of the client-side people I speak to in insights departments have scaled back. In other departments, they haven't. But it's really not been delivering what they need in the way they need it. And we can look at that because what is really useful about social is that it answers questions that we didn't ask. That is great, but there actually isn't always somebody with a budget. If you are a research agency, you've got a whole lot of answers about a brand, but the brand is not asking those questions. It's very hard to sell them those answers. If you're an insight manager inside the brand and you've got a lot of answers, it's really difficult for that to be leveraged if you can't find somebody who needs those answers. So that is part of the challenge. Where social has been great is in crisis management, in awareness, in highlighting the problem, a change in sentiment, all of those things. Those are the kind of the strengths, but they've been picked up through relatively simple monitoring techniques. However, social is usually quite bad at answering market research questions. Look back at the last 20 RFQs you had and look at how specific the types of questions. And they're very often about this advertising we haven't run. What do people think about it? These new packs that we haven't shown anybody, what do people think about them? Even really simple things like, should we put the price up, which is a perfectly normal market research question, social media tends not to come back with, there seems to be an acceptance that the price should go up out there. So it's not very good at answering the sorts of questions that market research is typically asked for. And when I sort of say that social media is underperforming, I get this comment really frequently. I agree, most social media research is underdelivered, but my company are doing it right. And they're telling the truth. Nearly everybody who says this to me is telling the truth, because it's not just that they're doing it right, it's that they're answering those questions that fit social media research. There are questions that fit social media research, and I'm going to give you a bit of an example. One of the projects I'm working on in the UK at the moment is called the IPA Social Works project, and I'm heading up the writing of a guide to evaluating social. So it's the IPA, it's the Market Research Society, it's the Marketing Society, it's LinkedIn, it's Twitter, and it's Facebook. And we're looking at what are the best ways of evaluating social. And the IPA have collected, and this is not part of my project, I've collected some great case studies and they validated and peer-reviewed these case studies on how social can be used and how it can be measured. And one of the ones on their websites, and if you search these you'll get to the website, is on BT. So this is the BT case study. So they've identified net easy as a key metric in reducing churn. If people find doing business with them is easy, it reduces the number of people who leave them. They've developed a social media monitoring tool called DebateScape, and that trawls through social media for relevant conversations. A very large part of what it does is nothing to do with market research. It finds comments, treats them as CRM, puts them into the workflow situation. Somebody has got a problem, let's fix the problem. Somebody else is inquiring about this, let's put them in touch with sales. So no anonymity whatsoever. This is direct response. I mean, the pure anathema to traditional market research. But they also use DebateScape to generate key metrics that, and they're just one element, along with surveys and lots of other things that go into the net easy score that enable them to measure how they're doing. What is the ROI of the whole project? £2 million, so what about $3 million US, cost reduction per year. 600,000 people per year are being dealt with via social instead of voice, and that's one of the things that's driving the cost. So social used partly for market research, partly for service delivery, partly for sales, partly as an overall CRM process can be fantastic. Here, the text analytics have been great because it's the same thing over and over again. The machine learns, it's trained, it gets better and better and better and delivers great value. So, looking at those on our scale. Webcam call, it's not so scalable, it will improve. Efficacy, only some situations, it will improve. Facial coding, yeah, the efficacy is quite good when done the right way, but its scalability is going to remain a problem with everything that we think is really good. Social media, it is already bigger than those. It's bigger than most of the things that we've looked at, and it will improve. I think we will see social media 2.0, where we start to ask questions more in the social context in order to be able to explore those things that people simply aren't talking about. As I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of other things that we could have covered today. I'm going to run through these really, really quickly. So, what about gamification? Very few problems fit gamification perfectly. If you've got the right problem, it's great. Beyond that, it's really a method of taking the learnings from gamification and applying them to how do we improve engagement, how do we improve the overall service. So it's going to be a bit of a niche, either because you've got that particular problem or because you're going to take gamification and apply its sort of core thinking to a wider range of things. Neuroscience, the better stuff, yes. Efficacy reasonable. Scalable, it tends not to be. I think there are a few interesting pieces like implicit association, which is much more scalable, relatively narrow in the number of situations that it can be used, but certainly interesting. Behavioral economics, yeah, it's certainly capable of unpicking some really quite tricky problems. It tends not to be scalable the way we think about it at the moment. It would need another breakthrough for somebody to come up with something that was a really scalable situation. One of the reasons for that is that what we know about behavioral economics is context is everything. Framing is everything. So if you completely understand how playing French music and German music work in this off-license in this country this year, it's very hard to generalize that to other types of alcohol sales or other countries or other years or even other songs from the French and German music design. So there's a bit of a slippery road when we go down the behavioral economics. If we make the learning too specific, then it's hard to apply it. If we make the learning more general, it's hard to really get the benefits of behavioral economics, and we're looking for some people to come up with breakthroughs in that area. Mobile ethnography. it's fantastic. If you've not done any mobile diaries, mobile ethnography, really getting inside people's lives, then I would urge you to do so. However, because we are normally processing video, it has some real scalability issues. You would normally conduct these exercises with 12, 16 people. I think we're going to see some interesting things with crowdsourcing where that pushes up towards the 30s, but it's always going to be limited. And it's not a situation where a senior exec comes to you and says, I need an answer this afternoon about whether to do A or B. Mobile ethnography is still going to require proper project design before you start. That probably never will be less than a couple of weeks, often longer. It's very rare that your ethnography is going to last fewer than a few days. It may well last days, weeks, or even months, and then you're going to have to do some analysis of that process. So its scalability, I think, is always going to be challenged. Passive data. So we're collecting passive data all the time. Comcast collect it. A lot of the ratings company collect it. It's an important process. Most of those things are not inside core market research. What we're looking at is more and more passive data being collected. So where was your mobile phone? How did you use your mobile phone? We're looking at tracking a whole variety of things. There are very few good case studies where people can point to better business decisions being made out of that data in a market research context as opposed to a CRM context at the moment. That will change. It is going to get a whole lot better. It's going to get a whole lot more scalable. That's why I've given it a really long arrow there. So long arrow, big change. And then big data. Most big data projects don't work very well, especially, maybe not even especially. Most of them don't work very well. A few of them work really, really well. So a lot of CMOs, a lot of chief information officers are going to find themselves running a project that fails to cover its costs and putting their careers at risk. And some are going to run projects that are going to run really, really well. We'll have a whole lecture again on big data and the specific nature of the problems. But I would recommend anybody who's interested in big data to read Nate Silver's The Signal and the Noise. It really brings home to you which things can be solved by a big data application, and he points at weather forecasting, how much better weather forecasting has got, and which problems are really problematic, and he points at economic forecasting and earthquake forecasting, where we have masses of data and a very, very poor forecasting record. So big data it's going to be a curious challenge. It is obviously going to get a lot better. It's going to get a lot bigger. It's not going to live in market research. I don't think any CEO or COO in their right mind would put the handling of all the company's transactional information data processing systems in the hands of market research. We will work in a team collaboratively with other people. I think that is the excitement. We will benefit from what they can do, and we need to add what they can do. I find it reassuring and interesting that all of the good data companies that I come across, Twitter, Facebook, Yahoo, Google, all run market research programs, because as well as knowing what people do, they need to do surveys, they need to do focus groups, they need to actually understand why people do things. So leaving big data on the screen, just going to add a couple more. I've left that one there as a reference point. So wearables, quantified self, life logging. This is going to be fascinating. It's going to be absolutely niche. It's going to be based on slightly unusual people. It's going to give really in-depth data and information about some of those people. It's going to be small, and it's going to take a while to take off. Geo-tracking, as opposed to the beacon stuff, has got a couple of major problems. GPS doesn't work everywhere. Not everybody turns it on. It requires more compliance, and we don't have really good tools for turning it into analysis. That is going to change. People are going to come along with better solutions to that, and there are some other alternatives based around cell tower tracking and things like that that are going to take us into some interesting space. So I wouldn't be putting a lot of money into them, but I think they are quite interesting. What does the near future hold? Mobile. It's all about mobile. If you've only got time to focus on one thing in the near future, mobile. So traditional mobile in traditional research. In the moment, including collecting multimedia, location-based research, passive data collection, putting in devices into apps onto phones that collect all sorts of information. The second one, and it's not completely separate, is participative research. So we're going to see more 360-degree panels where they collect social media data and passive data and geographic data and survey data and qualitative data, and they bring them in for focus groups and situations like that. And we're going to see a lot more of that, and we're going to see these people recruited as researchers, as collaborators in the research process. That is an essential part of in the moment. Somebody who is in the moment researching with you is a collaborator. They are part researcher, part citizen. It changes the basis of what's going on. And those are really the two big themes. I'm going to do a shameless plug now. I got a message from Amazon today. My book, our book, Sue York, Naveen Williams, myself, is on sale. It's audible and deliverable from amazon.co.uk. You can order it from amazon.com, but they won't deliver it until the 9th of September. We've got a book launch at NewMR if you're going to be in Nice on the 8th of September, and there's going to be a book launch, a virtual book launch on the 11th of September. And this has shaped my thinking about why mobile is so big, but it's also shaped the thinking about which book did we need to write. Finally, coming to an interesting and the final criticism of the blog piece that somebody put in was we should stop obsessing about surveys. And 4 years ago at the MRS conference, I was lucky enough to grab hold of the microphone, and I said there won't be any more surveys in 20 years. I said that because I heard one of my least favorite comments. Somebody said, we will always need surveys. And every time I hear someone say, we will always need focus groups, we will always need cars, we will always need telephones, I think probably not. We've not always had them, so it's hard to imagine we always will have them in the future. And I picked 20 years as a bit of a rough estimate back in 2010, and then I wrote a blog about it the next day, slightly more settled, and I thought about it. I excluded social research because I think social research may well still continue to have them, and I excluded micro-surveys. Back in 2010 I was excluding micro-surveys, and the reason I thought that we wouldn't have surveys as we know them today in 20 years time was that we'd be using more social media listening, more discussions in social media, and at that time I was saying MROCs are just the start, and I think that's certainly true. More new ways of researching ideas, think online gambling, think the electronic markets, using bidding systems, web analytics, CRM, and we're seeing all of that coming through. More open-ended research, processing open-ended questions, and using stored data held about panel community members. We are seeing all of that happening. There is no doubt that this is all going on, but we have a paradox and a timeline now for no surveys. So this is from the SMR data, 2007, 2010, 2013. And its percentage of spend. So the amount of money spent on surveys as a percentage of all money spent on market research in 2007 was 51%. That went up to 56% by 2010 and has dropped slightly to 53%. The number of surveys conducted has gone up. I've just finished doing the pricing study for SMR. The price of research has gone down. So the number of surveys has gone up, and of course on top of this there are all those DIY surveys, but the value of surveys has dropped pretty much, which is what I was saying 4 years ago. It's dropped by 3%. Other quant, that includes passive data collection. It dropped a lot from 2007 to 2010. That's because it got cheaper, it got better, it got more efficient. Also, all those people who were making money out of web analytics programs found that Google was giving their stuff away at Google Analytics for free, changing the cost base of that part of the economy. Qual, relatively static 2007%, but it jumped in 2013 to 17%. And other research, communities tend to be in other. Secondary research, consultative research are all in other, and they have grown as well. So we have to look at this and say, how quickly could surveys decline and other things grow? And here is my guess estimate. I think 2016 we might see surveys down to 44%. It would be the single biggest method of collecting information, because we have a paradox. Most of the interesting changes are about using surveys less. The most important data collection we have are surveys, and it is going to stay the most important collection for another 5 years, maybe longer, because if we look at that other quant section in 2019, it's 37%, but that's made up of lots and lots of different techniques. Surveys is effectively one technique, and it's still going to be about a third if I'm right. And for me to be right, surveys have to decline 9% in between 2013 and 2016, and then decline another 11%. So that's a really aggressive schedule. So when people tell you that, you know, surveys are dead and we shouldn't be obsessing with surveys, they're right if they're looking at finding methods of changing the future, looking at areas of interest of change. They're fundamentally wrong if they're talking about how we make a living today and how we answer our clients' problems today. We have to balance the two pieces. So the other thing that people talk about is beyond MR. And beyond MR can be people doing surveys who don't think of it as market research, but it's also all of that big data stuff. It's all of that analytics stuff. It's all the stuff that's happening. It's flurry for passive data collection just bought by Yahoo. Everybody has an iceberg prediction saying, well, the bit you can see is the small bit under the water, there is the big bit. And I think that's true, but the bit that's under the water is nothing like the bit above the water. We should not be looking at business integration, large data, and those sets as something that we are trying to take over, because that's folly. What we should be looking at is an opportunity for us to take our skills and our methods and our thinking in order to be able to help and make a living and advance that area, and also to take ideas from that back into the realm of market research so that we can do our roles better. So with that, I'd say thank you very much, and I'm going to click onto there and I'm going to go and see whether or not we have any questions.